Hello everyone and welcome to DIY Projects with Pete, Episode 3, Part 2. In the first video, I showed you how to assemble a farmhouse style coffee table, and in this, we'll do the finishing. I'll show you how to distress, sand, stain, and poly the project. Here are the supplies you're going to need. I use a walnut wood stain, semi-gloss poly, 120 and 220 grit sandpaper, and a 400 grit. Now the first step we're going to do is sand that coffee table. Use an orbital sander and grab a 120 grit paper to put on that. Sand the top and all sides. Now it's time to distress the table. You can use all sorts of tools like hammers, chains, saw blades, and even things like this. So here's how you do it. Here's a pipe wrench. This tool can scratch the surface here, kind of like this. It adds some cool effects. Sometimes I'll take a hammer. I like the hammer mark that it leaves. Here's a neat effect. If you take a saw blade, you can just run it over, and it leaves some saw blade marks. Don't forget to hit the side of the table. Get those areas as well. And one of my favorite ways to distress a table is to take a small drill bit, and you can take a hammer then and hit the circle end into it and make a bunch of little dots close together, and it makes it look like they're wormholes. You can distress the table as much as little as you like, but just make sure to do it in random areas to make it look natural. Grab your orbital sander with some 220 grit sandpaper and briefly sand the top to remove any splinters that may have formed during the distressing process. Once that's done, we can go ahead and clean off that table to prep it for the walnut stain that we're going to use today. Either grab an air compressor or a damp rag to wipe off the table and get all the dust off. You'll be ready to start the staining process. All right, now we've finished doing the distressing and sanding, so we're ready to go ahead and finish it. We're going to age the table, and we're going to do that by creating a mixture. So we'll take some steel wool, number 0000, that you can get at any hardware store. And then we're just going to take some distilled white vinegar and grab a plastic cup. And then you can go ahead and take that white vinegar, pour it into the cup, and then go ahead and take some of that steel wool, put it in here, let it sit for about 24 hours or more, and over time the steel wool is actually going to disintegrate into the vinegar. And once that happens, it's going to get a dark color, and the longer you let it sit, the darker it's going to get. I always have this on hand, so this has just been sitting around for quite a few days. And so what I just did was I diluted it, since it's a little stronger than what I need, and put it in this cup, and I just diluted it by adding some more vinegar. All right, so this little mixture is going to kind of give it an aged barnwood look. It's going to react with the tannins in this pine wood and kind of bring out the grain and the distress marks and blacken them up and give them a gray color too. So we'll go ahead and just paint it on. Just use a cheap brush. You'll notice that the fir wood takes this mixture much better than the white pine, but it will still bring out some neat grain from that white pine, and so I think it's worth it to use this vinegar solution. Now we're ready to stain the table. Here's the dark walnut that I use. Grab a clean towel and apply that stain onto the table. I use a towel instead of a brush because it goes on more even. It's pretty quick, and you can also get a nice thin coat. Usually do about 1 coat, that's what I'd recommend. Let that dry, and then you're ready to start your poly coats. Make sure you're wearing rubber gloves for this process, and that you also have a brush with you so you can get in some of those crevices that you can't get in with that towel. Do the top, the shelf, all sides, and even the bottom. I turned up the heat a little bit, let the stain dry overnight, and then in the morning, you'll be ready to do your poly coat. I like to use a clear semi-gloss polyurethane to finish the table. I've found that it gives it a durable finish and it's not too shiny. Make sure when you are applying this polyurethane that you use a decent brush. If you use one of the cheaper ones, the bristle hairs will fall out and they'll be all over your finished product. Do 2 thick coats of this polyurethane on that table. After the first coat is done, you can apply that second coat. And once that second coat is completely dry, which does take some time just because this is an oil-based polyurethane, but once that is dry, I'll take a 400 grit piece of sandpaper, put that on a sanding block, and sand the top and even the sides as well. But that'll knock off some of the rough spots. Sometimes dust will settle while your polyurethane is drying. And so this light sanding just takes care of that and smooths it right out again. Once you've finished with that sanding, you can take a clean, damp rag and just wipe that sawdust off there. Now we're ready for the third and final coat of polyurethane. This last coat goes on real thin, and to get that even and thin coverage, we're going to apply it using a rag instead of a brush. Now the purpose of this last coat is to help protect the table a little more and also to shine up any of those dull spots left from our last sanding. Once you're all done applying this polyurethane, let it dry completely, and once it's dry, it's ready to carry in the house and ready for use. Thanks so much for watching another episode of DIY Projects with Pete. For more information, visit petesven.com or connect with me at facebook.com/DIY Projects with Pete. Thanks again, and good luck building your farmhouse table.